Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This is how someone would have been greeted by Crowley had they met him. And the proper answer to that is love is the law, love under will. And all of that requires explanation because he's not saying do anything you want, but it's about finding your true will and following that, the purpose of your life, very innermost direction. So, and love is the law, love under will. Well, that was said by several people, including St. Augustine, who said it before Crowley did. And Franz Barden quotes it at one point in his books. And I don't know how many people know this, but Barden once wrote to Crowley to ask if he could translate some of his material. Now, I don't know what. There is proof that he wrote the letter. There's no evidence that I've seen whether Crowley ever received it or it was sent out or anything. But just there you can find that. So that probably doesn't help give you much of a picture of Crowley. Let's take a look at this picture of him. The Great Beast, 666, as he called himself. Wickedest man in the world, which he was not calling himself, but epitaphs used against him. Doesn't look very dangerous and demonic to me, but you know. I want to go into some of Crowley's actual work and ignore all the crap. There's a lot of stuff out there about Crowley that is not useful at all. The majority of things he's said to have done and the stories that are told about him never happened. A lot of them are completely made up. That doesn't mean the press didn't go wild with them. So rather than go into them, I'll just give one example of how these types of things happen to him. And the reader is always going to need to be able to judge for themselves what to dig out of Crowley. There's wisdom to be found there, but you need to dig to find it to a certain extent. But so this is an interesting little book he wrote called The Book of Wisdom or Folly, and it included this little loose thing with it. I don't know how old this is. I assume the same age as the book, which is 60s. So, how to avoid all this stuff about Crowley? Well, realize that 99% of it is sheer bull. You need to realize that Crowley was very serious about his magical progress, took it seriously, tried to do it seriously, and at the bottom of it all, he wasn't trying to fool anybody or anything. This is about his magic and what he did. And like I say, as an example of one of the incidents that happened, and now it's been a long time since I've read this, but so I'm not going to try to remember the names and things, but he had an abbey of Thelema, might have been in Sicily, but I'm not sure. And a young man, I believe, by the name of Raoul Loveday, and forgive me if I'm wrong, I might be remembering these details wrong, ended up getting dysentery at the Abbey of Thelema because the water was bad, and apparently people had been warned about drinking the water. And it was kind of a known thing. But if I don't want to get the name wrong, but this young man had a girlfriend who hated Crowley and didn't want him to get involved by any means whatsoever. So her boyfriend subsequently got dysentery, sorry, not like a Dyson sphere. He suddenly got dysentery and died. And so, of course, his girlfriend or his sister, I think it was his girlfriend, uh, told the cops that they had sacrificed a cat and were drinking its blood together, all out of a pot or something. And that's how her boyfriend got sick and died. And it turns out to just be an ordinary accidental case of dysentery. Uh, Not that I'm going to whitewash Crowley either. He was a man of his times, so to speak, which means he had all the now frowned upon negative opinions about women and things that was public at the time. And it's also said by some that he had a bit of a cruel streak. The man was not a Satanist, regardless. He was not what I would call as a Satanist. He is not what most people would call a Satanist if they understood what Crowley did. And nothing against the Satanists, but he really wasn't. He called himself the Beast 666. And this is taken from the seal of the sun, which adds up to 666. And the 6 is the number of harmony. And Crowley was a Leo, a solar sign. So this just all added up perfectly to him. And in addition to that, he grew up with a sect of very strict, his father was a preacher of very strict Christians called the Plymouth Brethren, and his mother would call him the Beast 666 all the time. And so he just kind of adopted it and took that as his motto. And he said, 666 is the number of a man. I'll try to be worthy of it if I can. And one other thing we might want to just briefly mention is the name. If people call his name Crowley, it's because they can only treat him foully. His name is Holy, or his name is Crowley, and it rhymes with holy. And he said something of that nature himself. Those who wish to treat me foully call me Crowley. So Crowley it is, and that's not his affectation. That was the name of his father's family, the Crowley. I believe they had a beer empire of some sort. So we have this man. What else do we know about him? He had held for a while, several mountain climbing records. Just think about that. I mean, we're talking K2, the serious stuff. World records. Another thing to know about him, just as casual knowledge, he played what I have read described as basically grandmaster level chess, being able to play several people at the same time with his eyes blindfolded and playing them from the chessboards in his head. And you start learning some of these things about Crowley, and you start wondering what all the hubbub is about. And it really is all a bunch of fear-mongering, and the fact that at that time when Crowley was alive, they absolutely loved, the press loved any sort of scandal or anything like that. He did get kicked out of the country by Mussolini, and I believe it was Mussolini who called him the wickedest man in the world. So you also have to consider your sources where these things came from. So with that, I'm only going to mention 2 more aspects regarding to his personality. As far as I can tell, he did 2 potential things that I myself would not do. And that is a small sacrifice of animals. It is clear that he did sacrifice 3 pigeons once, and he crucified a toad, apparently, in an attempt to get rid of Christianity, which I don't advise, but, if you want to put yourself against the whole mass, the whole psychic mass of Christianity, well, go for it and I wish you luck, but I'm not going to. Just saying. That's a lot of psychic energy to try to deal with. So here we have this conundrum. And that's what he was. He was a conundrum and he was a contradiction. You have to watch out for books about him. I have two that I just picked up lately. This one, that I just, picked up from my bookshelf lately. The Legends of Aleister Crowley by Israel Regardie and P.R. Stevenson. Oh, pew. Yeah, not good. There was a rift between Crowley and Regardie, and Regardie was all pissed off and wrote him a really nasty letter that started something like, "Hey Alice, you contemptible bitch," instead of, because his first name was Aleister Crowley. And then he was, for the rest of his life, pissed off that Crowley wouldn't forgive him for his letter and stuff. So, yeah, things like that you can get a lot of facts from, which are accurate. I don't deny Regardie his accuracy. He, after all, was Crowley's secretary for a long time. But his attitude is definitely, seem kind of blurry to you. Just to me. No, maybe that's better. Okay, anyway, back to Crowley. Regardie had some personal distaste and dislikes about him and said some stuff about his magic that I just totally disagree with. And he was probably one of the ones who knew Crowley the best, but even he isn't safe from vilifying him in his books, even while he also talks about some of his outstanding qualities. Now, I'm not going to vilify anybody. I'm not making judgments here, but if you want to get a real idea of Crowley, the only way to do it truly is through his work. I have this other one, and by Colin Wilson, an old one again, on Crowley, and whoo, same thing. Lots of accurate facts, but boy does it stink as far as the attitudes and skepticism towards him, in my opinion, and the sheer what's the word? The sheer hubris of thinking they've got it all understood. Crowley was a profound and deep thinker, among other things, including a drug fiend and some other things. I mean, I don't want to minimize his negative qualities, but there's a lot of valuable information there. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to read this. I have another little thing I may or may not read here. I guess I won't, because I don't want this to get too long. There's a newspaper article about, here it is. No man in our times was slandered more during his life, nor as much after his death, as the late Aleister Crowley. The front of this is called Aha. It's part of a work on magic and mysticism, where he tries to get through some of the points of view, some of the initiated points of view and feelings and things. And so I thought I'd read just a little bit of his poetry so people can get an idea of the type of thing he did, in addition to which everybody likes to throw out in public, the one book of pornography he did for one of his wives. So I'm going to read just a little bit of this, and I'm starting in the middle. Of all the flowers in God's field, we name not this. Our lips are sealed in that the universal key lieth within its mystery. But know thou this: these visions give a hint, both faint and fugitive, yet haunting, that behind them lurks some worker greater than his works. Yea, it is given to him who girds his loins up, is not fooled by words, who takes life lightly in his hand to throw away at will's command, to know that view beyond the veil. O petty purities and pale, these visions I have spoken of, the infinite light, the infinite Lord of light and love breaks on the soul like dawn. See, see, great God of might and majesty, beyond sense, beyond sight, a brilliance burning from his glowing glance, formless all the worlds of flame, atoms of that fiery frame, the adept caught up and broken, slain before his name be spoken. In the fire that burns up, one drop from that celestial cup is an abyss, an infinite sea that sucks up immortality. But, oh, but the self is manifest through all that blaze. Memory stumbles like a blind man for all the rest. Speech, like a crag of limestone, crumbles, while this one soul of thought is sure through all confusion to endure the infinite truth in one small span, that this that is God is man. Okay, we'll stop that one there. That's a good example of some of his poetry. He also did a bunch of poetry along the lines of Swinburne stuff, and a lot about some of his mountain climbing experiences. I'm not going to dig them all up because he's got just such a huge amount of stuff out there. So I was going to show everyone his Toth deck, but you've probably already seen it, and I couldn't locate it before, and he needed to do this video now to get it going. So a couple of other things. Someone wants a basic start on the magical weapons and some magical aspects. This and some bit on yoga, I believe, is in this book also. This is Crowley's book, Book 4. And this is basically considered for those that are more or less beginners to his doctrines and things, though there's some not beginnerly ideas in there. Anyway, Crowley's not easy to start with because he knows so much symbology and it came so readily to hand that he gets confusing and hard to read. However, his writing is top-notch. His fiction stories are mediocre, but the writing style and his use of grammar and things is really top-notch. So now I'm going to mention the big elephant in the room with Crowley. That's this little book called the Book of the Law. And now it threw off my focus. Are you going to refocus? Okay. So, the Book of the Law, and I believe this happened exactly the same way Crowley says it did, because I have experienced enough stuff myself to know that it would be very reasonable for this to have come about the way Crowley described it, and he described it as being, there's a long story prequel to it, but basically he was sitting in a room having it dictated to him. From what he said, sounded like a voice coming from directly over his left shoulder. Now, I have communicated and have had things communicated to me in a similar fashion. In my case, it's always been clear they were not physical, but in automatic writing and stuff. So I believe he received it the way he said he did. And that's one of the things Rigardi and a bunch of others take some issue with, whether he made up his guardian angel and just wrote all this stuff down because he was so erudite, and he actually was. We're not talking any slob, we're talking a well-educated, scientifically based thinking grandmaster at chess. So I'm saying that without truly knowing what a grandmaster at chess is, since I am not one, and I'm bad at chess. But, you know, anybody finds out what the even his detractors don't deny the certain things, like that he won mountain climbing. I mean, the proof is there. He held the record. So the Book of the Law is one of the most controversial things you will ever see. And I tell you, it has a thing in the back of it. And, oh, if I can find it, I'll read it. I'll read the comment on the Book of the Law. And this is his most controversial work. I'm not going to go into it. It has some stuff that takes some understanding, like people who read it, it would help if they had an understanding of Crowley, like the fact that he often used to cover sexual practices that he wasn't allowed to speak of and things, or didn't want to, or wanted to hide, or just like the way it looked. I'm not sure. But he would hide it as like, so an ejaculation he would call staining the tomb if he's having sex with a woman, that kind of thing. Or if he was masturbating, he might call it killing a male child, killing a bunch of male children. Though there were those who contest that he killed like hundreds of babies or something for his rights. As a matter of fact, Crowley was never in any country convicted of any crime of any sort. He had a couple of court appearances, which were not due to so much crime, but it is like libel type of things like that. So how do you get somebody, if he's talking about killing cattle and killing a child, and the fact is that, well, I guess we'll leave it at that. He uses that as sexual euphemisms, and anybody who wants to delve into it and uncover that side of things is welcome. I will read you the quote on the back of the Book of the Law, and I will also say I found Crowley's stuff very useful and helpful in learning magical stuff. Okay, so here's what he says about the Book of the Law, and I would take it seriously because I tell you, there is no lack of hatred among other people out there, I've found out, especially regarding this issue. So the comment, "Do what thou wilt" should be the whole of the law. The study of this book is forbidden. It is wise to destroy this copy after the first reading. Whosoever disregards this does so at his own risk and peril. These are most dire. And, yeah. Those who discuss the contents of this book are to be shunned by all as centers of pestilence. All questions of the law are to be decided only by appeal to my writings, each for himself. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. Love is the law, love under will. The priest of the princes, Alcove Kansu, and I don't know how to pronounce that properly. So, that's a part of Crowley, and I actually want to cover in more depth in the future some of his works, and some of the interesting ones. I'm particularly interested in the Book of Lies, falsely so called, because it's actually a book of what I will call relative truths. It contains truth, but you have to be at a certain level to understand it. Otherwise, if you take it literally, it'll be folly. So this was the Book of Wisdom or Folly, Liber Aleph, and that's this one that I showed you as picture in Hastings. And in that, he's tried to condense down much of his wisdom as much as he could, and it's got one subject per chapter, and each chapter is not necessarily an entire page. Get like this type of thing, so they're not quite an entire page. But each one is a distilled workings, as he put it, if I can find it clearly, yes. This book is written in prose, yet there is a formal circumscription more imminent than anything which I would have been possible in poetry. I limited myself by making a point of dealing thoroughly with a given subject in a single page. It was an acute agony similar to that of a sonnet to write, and the effort removed me so far from normal human consciousness that there was something indicibly ghastly in its naturalness when I got into bed in full daylight in the hope of acquiring a particle of warmth from the complacent camel, and that would be the woman he was with at the time. When he began writing this, he thought he was addressing it to his magical son, in quotes, OIVVIO. But we won't go any farther into that. Those are all details which are out there to be found. This actually, I believe, didn't get published, till after Crowley's death. And Liber Aleph, as he says, the Book of Wisdom or Folly, was intended to express the heart of my doctrine in the most deep and delicate dimensions. It is the most tense and intense book that I have ever composed. The thought is so concentrated, and if I may use the word nervous, that both to write then and to read now involved and involves an almost unbearable strain. I remember how I used to sit at my desk night after night. It was the bitterest winter that had been known in New York for many years, but if the central heating had been the flames of hell itself, I doubt whether I should have been warm. Night after night I sat, all through, rigid as a corpse and icier, the whole of my life concentrated in two spots, the small section of my brain which was occupied in the work, and my right wrist and fingers. I remember with absolute clearness that my consciousness appeared to start from a perfectly dead forearm. And he's got every page here. Got, 208 pages. And because this is an old book, it has a vellum pasted in errata. Just out of curiosity, let's see, I think this is about 1962. Those are some things about Crowley. Keep in mind that most of the stuff you hear has gotten exaggerated or done in a exaggerated fashion about him. He did make some waves. Some of the stuff he did was funny, and I think even though it created a furor at the time, it was part of what the press brought against him. Things like, I believe it was a Rodin statue that Rodin had made. Crowley knew Rodin and put it up in a park, and apparently it was this great Rodin nude. And the city decided they couldn't have a nude statue. So apparently they made a big brass butterfly and put it right over the crotch of the statue. So with Crowley's typical sense of humor, he removed the butterfly, attached it to his own crotch, and walked into some public event somewhere with it attached on his crotch. And I thought that was really a brilliant statement towards the people who put it there. And I thought that was funny and entertaining. So, yes, he had a cruel streak. So I have read. I haven't heard anything that actually makes me think he was being cruel. Part of Regardie's stuff is after they had broken apart, and it's clear in this particular book of Regardie's, and not so much in some of his others, but in this particular one, it's very clear that he had some serious case of sour grapes against Crowley. So, all these things got to be taken in line with all the exaggerations. I have a whole book that is just on all the ridiculous press and exaggerations that got said about Crowley. And there were more of them than you can believe. One of the ones that I had heard about myself, not through one of these books, is that everybody was afraid that he'd placed astral microphones in his tarot so he could listen in on them. So you have to consider where these things come from. And if I cover more stuff on Crowley in the future, I would appreciate knowing um, what you guys want to know, because he has a huge, vast amount of literature, and what I can do and what you're interested in. And I'll see if I can, for the future, I don't want to make any promises because I never know what life will bring. You got to stay open to changes. But he has a lot of work that I'd like to go into for some little videos, just some of his various works and things, maybe some of his various rituals and things, because you can't really know what Crowley was about unless you ignore all the stuff and take it as it is. And there's a little thing I wanted to read in the back of one of these as a little end piece. Oh, I believe it. Maybe. Lost everything. Come on. There we go. Just cover it. As this author, and I'm not sure who wrote this little article that was with this book, says here, and I agree with this: do you have moral courage? Do you have intellectual honesty? Are you not utterly bent under the yoke, succulent beast, lamb of the fold of the slaves of the slave gods? In short, is there manhood in you yet? Forgive me, ladies. Then open this book, if you will, and meet the wickedest man in the world. Meet Aleister Crowley.